Crimean War, being the first major world power conflict in 40 years, acted as the birth of modern warfare. It was fought between Britain, France, Turkey and Austria against Russia from 1854 to 1856, during which many of the dominant weapons of the period arose. The Allied forces had a far superior industrial base from which to supply their army, as opposed to the Russians, who were very backward-thinking in their approach. Their army consisted mainly of cavalry and infantry, with smooth-bore muskets and basic artillery, whereas the Allies had percussion rifles and powerful artillery easily capable of outranging the Russians. The French Navy, using their new metal warships compared to the Russian wooden vessels, meant a rapid and complete takeover of the Black Sea. These technological advantages led to the successful takeover of Balaclava harbour and the fortress of Sebastopol during the siege lasting from September 1854 to September 1855. Also vital to the siege victory was the Allied force being able to keep their army supplied at a higher rate than the Russians, using steamships carrying supplies from their homes thousands of miles away. The Russian forces still had to rely on supply trains and marching due to their poor railway network and lack of technological advancement. Despite the superior technologies involved in the war, tactics were still rooted in Napoleonic tradition. This was most evident in the tragic Charge of the Light Brigade during the Battle of Balaclava on the 25th of October 1854. This was a cavalry charge by the Allies in an attempt to prevent the Russians from capturing Allied guns. The order should have been to attack a different location. However, miscommunication between Captain Lewis Nolan and Lord Lucan led to the fatal charge on a fortified Russian valley. Furthermore, there was also a little-known Charge of the Heavy Brigade, which was a successful battle against the Russian front. What should have happened is the Light Brigade charging in after and finishing off the retreating Russians. However, another miscommunication in orders led to the brigade just standing and watching, having apparently been ordered to just defend their location. It was not only the Allied forces that made grievous errors in combat. At the Battle of Inkerman on the 5th of November 1854, Russian forces used the Napoleonic tactic of columns in an attempt to break the Allied line. However, the Allied forces had superior weapons and could easily defend their location in face of this attack, resulting in the Russian army suffering 4 times the number of casualties. During the course of the war, the Allies rifled their artillery, as at the time it would have been too expensive to incorporate the already made breech-loading rifled cannons, resulting in far superior range than the Russians, and was one of the most copied weapons of the period after the war. Also, the Crimean War was photographed. These snaps were then sent back to Britain and plastered all over the newspapers, showing how terrible the living conditions of the soldiers were. This added to the pressure of public opinion to the commanders' tactics, as they would not want to be thought badly of if the army sustained high casualties for unworthy gains.
After the death of Nicholas I, his far more liberal son, Alexander II, ascended to the throne. Following the embarrassing defeat of Russian forces at Sevastopol, Alexander II sued for peace. In February of 1856, the Treaty of Paris was signed, ending the Crimean War. Alexander II, also known as Alexander the Liberator, began radical reforms in Russia. In March of 1861, he signed an act that would emancipate all serfs. The act created emancipation committees in all provinces where serfdom still existed. The freeing of the serfs is where Alexander II gets his title the Liberator from. Due to the horrid defeats in the Crimean War, Alexander sought to bring both the army and the navy up to date. Included in his plans to reform the military, Alexander instated universal military conscription, meaning that all sons, whether or not if they came from rich or poor families, could and would be conscripted into the military. Alexander also set up an army reserve, set up a military district system, built strategic railways across his empire, improved the education of the officer corps, and outlawed corporal punishment and branding in the military. Alexander then reformed the judicial system, basing the new system off a French model. The new system called for a new penal system, simplification of the civil and criminal procedures, and reorganization of the judicial branch, which included open trial courts with judges that were appointed for life, a new jury system, and the creation of justices of the peace to deal with minor offenses at the local level. Alexander II also instituted zemstvos, a form of local government with assemblies consisting of large land proprietors and delegates from 4 other socio-economic groups. Since 1795, Russia had always had a tight grip on Poland. Under Nicholas II, Polish people were forced to learn Russian in schools. Works by famous Polish authors were banned, and the lands of the Catholic Church were seized and secularized. Things changed in the late 1850s under Alexander II. Polish people were given more representative government, the lands of the church were returned, and by 1862 all rights taken away by Nicholas I had been returned by Alexander II. However, in 1863, when a group of Polish men did not want to be conscripted into the Russian army, a rebellion broke out. To respond to the rebellion, Alexander II sent hundreds of thousands of troops to put down the rebellion. By 1864, the rebellion was brutally crushed. Following the rebellion, Alexander took away all rights that he had given back. He executed 128 rebels and deported another 12,000 to Siberia. He banned Polish in official places. He also confiscated money and used it to further develop the Orthodox Church in Poland. During the late 19th century, there was a movement called the Nihilist movement. They opposed all forms of authority. The Nihilist movement became the Narodnik movement in Russia. Within the Narodnik movement, there were groups such as the People's Will, or Narodnaya Volya in Russian. They were the group that would end up assassinating Alexander II. Other groups include the Circle of Tchaikovsky and Land and Liberty. After the assassination of Alexander II by the Narodnaya, his son Alexander III, who ascended the throne, was quite the opposite of his father. Alexander III followed the ideas of Nicholas I. He wanted a single nationality, language, and religion for all of Russia. He forced all people under Russian rule, besides the Finnish, to speak Russian. He emphasized the importance of the Orthodox Church. He put down other religions in his empire, especially the Jews. In 1882, Alexander III passed the Mayes Laws, which banned Jews from inhabiting rural areas and restricted occupations that Jews could have. To strengthen the power of the monarchy, he weakened the power of the Zemstvo. When it came to foreign affairs, Alexander III was peaceful, as he avoided war with Germany. In 1894, Alexander III died of nephritis, the inflammation of the kidneys. Sergei Vita presided over the industrialization of Russia. He served under the last 2 emperors as the transport minister, the finance minister, the chairman of the committee of ministers, and the chairman of the council of ministers. He is also the author of the October Manifesto, the precursor to the Russian Empire's first constitution, written in response to the 1905 revolution. The 1905 revolution was a wave of political and social unrest that reached all corners of the Russian Empire. There were worker strikes, there was peasant unrest, and there were military mutinies. 4 problems: agrarian, nationality, labor, and the educated class. Discontent with the Tsar's dictatorship manifested itself through political parties that opposed the monarchy and through industrial strikes for better living and working conditions. Protests, riots, and assassinations were often done by socialist revolutionaries. Vladimir Lenin was a communist revolutionary who followed the ideas of Karl Marx. He was a leader of the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party that had an influential role in the organization of the October Revolution that overthrew the Russian government. As the chairman of the Council of the People's Commissars and the Premier of the Soviet Union, he implemented a series of socialist reforms. He also advocated for Russia pulling out of World War I.